Hello, welcome to the very first episode of Evergrow Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Lawlick. Basically, this is going to be an episode 0. Episode 1 won't air for a little while, just until I get all the bugs worked out and figure out how this is all going to come together, right? So first off, Evergrow Podcast is basically going to be a podcast about music, the genres, artists, mediums that shape the world that we live in today, and from the past to the present to even the future. Most of my episodes will be about artists specifically. There'll be the odd one that's about maybe a historical event or something that happened that was very historical or meaningful to music in general. And I feel like, we can't know where we're going without knowing where we came from. I mean, anybody out there can sit there and say that there's a certain genre of music or a certain song, a certain artist that has moved them in such a way that they just have no words for it. I mean, people have songs that remind them of specific times in their lives, albums that remind them of being a teenager, or driving an old jalopy like Archie and Jughead. Although I don't think Jughead drove it. I think it was just Archie. But whatever. Anyways, moving on. So this episode 0 is going to be entitled The History of Sound Recording. The best place that I thought to start with is just to start with how it is we get the music we get. I mean, where does it really come from? It's not like, an artist sings something to you every day while you're going somewhere. No, it has to get recorded onto something. And then that medium is then passed to you, and you listen to your artist, and you think about what a great artist that person is. How they move you. Yeah, well, whatever. Whatever it does for you. I don't care if it tickles your funny bone or, makes you all giddy inside or sad. It moves you, and that's the important part. So that being said, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, music just didn't come together and was able to just be distributed to everybody and just kind of came to be. So how did it all start? Well, there's 4 huge eras that make up the history of sound recordings. The very first of those is the acoustic era. Now, the acoustic era took place between 1877 and 1925. Around that time, you're going to have the invention of things like the phonautograph, the phonograph, the gramophone. Those things are all part and parcel of the acoustic era. The acoustic era itself is the era in which you have a cone-shaped horn, okay? And at the end of this cone-shaped horn is going to be a pin, or maybe really anything that's going to scribe onto something else, be it tinfoil or like a music wheel, or you're going to have records, like records themselves, right? And the problem with this is that it wasn't very reliable. When you have a cone-shaped item, right, and you're trying to record sound, you've got this big gaping hole, and then it's going to focus all that air pressure, the physical air pressure from the music, into one spot, and then that is then going to start recording that sound. The problem with that is that when you're doing that, it only picks up hard sounds. Singing, horns, like trumpets were very popular when they were doing this, because those kind of things would pick up well, whereas like stringed instruments or things that play lightly wouldn't. Not to mention, if you were in a band, you would have to somehow organize your band in a way that they were facing this so that one thing wouldn't appear louder than the other thing, or if something was more predominant, they would have to move back, and the thing that was less predominant needed to move forward. So, in doing that, it was a really hard way to record anything. But I mean, at least there was recording being done. In 1857, the phonautograph, not to be mistaken with the phonograph, they're spelled two different ways. The phonautograph is PHONAUTOGRAPH. So, phonautograph. And I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly, and if I'm not, I'm sure somebody will correct me. It was invented in 1857 by Edward Leon Scott de Martinville. Very French sounding name. Now, at that time, the goal was to just have a device that could take sound, turn it into pressure, and that pressure would then be etched into something else, and then that something else could then be played. So when you're thinking about things like that, you're thinking about if you were to take an old record player, one of those cone-shaped ones, which is a gramophone, right? And you were to put that pin that's going to start recording it, or going to start playing it, and you're going to put it down on the record, and it's going to start, the vibrations coming from that are going to go through the gramophone, and then out that trumpet cone-shaped object, right? And then that's going to make the sound that you hear. The only problem with it is it's very muffled and not very clear. So eventually that whole idea needs to be built upon, right? And in around 1925, things start to take a step forward. With electricity, the electrical era starts. Now, the electrical era took place from 1925 to 1945. I know dates aren't really, oh, wow, 1945, but it kind of puts into perspective. I mean, the electrical era is almost one of the shortest eras. It's only 20 years long. And in 20 years, you're going to see that 20 years from when the electrical era ends and when the next era begins, it's almost like the time shortens, because we as a society, we just kind of rapidly produce better and faster and more easy ways of doing things. So anyways, back to what I was saying. The electrical era. It brought into introduction what the electrical microphone. So this thing I'm using now is technically, for the lack of a better word, an electrical microphone. It plugs in through USB, and electricity is recording the sound, or helping to record the sound. It also introduced a signal amplifier, which we'll kind of get into in a little bit. It eventually would be known as like a speaker, right? That's really what a signal amplifier ends up becoming. And disc cutting, which I'll touch on in a little bit as well. But anyways, so let's get back to an electrical microphone. So back when they had gramophones and your phonographs and phonographs, the problem was that you would always have to stand either closer, further, or in a comparable range, so that the loudest thing was the furthest and the quietest thing was the closest, so that when recording, you wouldn't have a lot of miscues, and you'd be able to kind of hear all the sounds that had to be offered by the singer, the band, the whatever was making the recording. What the microphone helped to do was that now you had a microphone. Now you had a source in which people could surround the microphone, and then you could kind of go at it from all angles, and so you could have your guitar player on this side, your bass player on this side, maybe your drum player on the other side, and your singer on the other side. That's 4 sides. The thing with that is that now you're able to pinpoint where your sound is going and then react appropriately. Makes recording a lot easier. It also changed how singers performed. I mean, now when you performed on stage as a singer, you didn't have to stand on a stage, have 100, 200 people there, and sing loudly and boastfully so they could all hear you. Because if you sang quietly or softly, they wouldn't be able to hear you because there was nothing to amplify that. Well, now with microphones, that kind of was able to be done. It kind of started the age of crooners and people would sing into microphones softly, like, and almost talking level. So that being said, microphones played a huge role, and they continue to play a huge role today. I mean, now there's microphones are created in a way different way, but the start is there. Now that you have microphones, you have a way of taking your voice and electronically passing it through whatever the medium is to distribute it in another way. Now, when you have a microphone and a signal amplifier, a speaker, now you can amplify that sound and make it louder so that everybody can hear it. You yourself don't have to be loud. The amplifier does that work for you. Now, for those of you who don't know how signal amplifiers or speakers or any of that stuff really works, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of people out there who do. I mean, people have owned cars and been buying stereo systems for their cars for, well, pretty much forever. And what it comes down to is that a signal amplifier is a box that has a paper reverberator in it, and it takes the vibration from speaking and it pushes it against that paper plate and makes that sound amplified, makes it stronger. And nobody would be able to describe better that being able to sing at a almost talking level and having something be able to amplify it makes it so much easier to record something. I mean, now you're talking about, instead of being only able to maybe sing to 100 people, because that's how many people can fit in a room where you can hear your voice, now you can sing in a room where you can fit 2,000 people, 5,000 people, 10,000 people, because now you have a way of amplifying your voice in a way that's that makes it louder for everybody to hear, right? I mean, that's the goal. You want to be able, as a singer, to produce your music in a way that you can cover the most amount of people. Now, at the same time in your electrical era, disc cutting also became something that was done. Now, disc cutting was adopted by pretty much every U.S. record label in about 1925. Now, what that is that now, instead of having to take something and record one copy and then painstakingly find a way of replicating that, now what disc cutting had done was make it available to be mass produced. Now you could take tracks or an album or whatever you needed to and replicate it a whole bunch of times, which is, again, to artists, to singers, is very, very important. I mean, that stuff needs to be done, right? You need to be able to appeal to all the masses and give them as much of your product as you can handle, right? Originally it was made with shellac, but shellac was kind of quickly passed over for vinyl. Vinyl would last a long time. I mean, people still buy vinyl today for its nostalgia, right? And there is a certain sound that you get from vinyl, and some people would debate that it's probably the best sound that you're going to get from vinyl. I don't particularly agree. I think that, for me, where we're at with music right now is about the best you're going to get when you're trying to listen to music, because you can really hear everything. And because we're at where we are now, there's so many layers. I mean, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. But we'll get into that later. So, after that, you get into the magnetic era. Now, your magnetic era is from 1945 to 1975. Now, right after World War II. So World War II ends, everybody's kind of, well, I mean, Germany came a piecemeal, right? The Allies took over, Hitler and his oppositionists deposed and moved on, and they're kind of just salvaging through the wreckage. But anyways, after the Allies gained access, they came across this invention that the Germans had had since about the 1930s, but had only really kind of been German property. So only Germans really knew about it up until after World War II, and then they find this invention, the magnetic tape. Now, for most of you, you're like, magnetic tape? Well, what the fuck? What magnetic tape basically is it's a small, thin ribbon that can be recorded onto with sound. And, it played such a big role in how music would continue to evolve. Because for magnetic tape, now you're allowing reel to reel. It would eventually become your audio cassette tapes, which was developed by Philips, I believe, and it allowed you to do a lot of multi-track recording. And for me to say multi-track recording is kind of an obscure thing, so break it down just a little. What multi-track recording is that when you're recording music, like let's say you have a band, you are the singer, you have a guitar player, you have a drum player, and maybe you have somebody who plays the triangle because you just love the sound of a triangle. Okay? Now you have this band, and up until now, if you wanted to record something, you all had to group together in a room and record all together. And the problem with that is that maybe the guitar is going to overlap something else that's being done when you're singing, and it makes it harder to hear certain things that are taking place when you're recording, right? So if you have the drum player and he keeps hitting the rim of the drum and it makes a loud clack, well, that might distract or throw off the sound of hearing the guitar playing or the singer. So what multi-track recording allowed was that now you could record one line of maybe just the singer singing, and then another line in which the band is playing, and then put the two lines parallel to each other, and they would play, and it would sound like they're both playing together instead of playing separate. And it sounded more like it would originally if you were all singing in a room, except now there's clarity. You can hear there's a distinct difference between the singer himself and the band playing. And of course that would later on go to, 3 tracks, 4 tracks, 5, and I mean it really goes on and on as technology develops. The amount of layers that one can put over another, it just continues to grow. You can just continue to put things over and over and over. Now when this all took place in 1945, there was a man by the name of Mullins who was sent to Germany to basically just gather information about how Germans passed information from one to another, and how they recorded. And he came across this magnetic tape recording. And when he brought it back to the U.S., he showed it to, a lot of people and showed them how it worked and how recording was able to happen. And Bing Crosby, Bing Crosby is most famous for singing Christmas carols of all things, but He really saw potential in that, and he wanted to make it so it was mass produced so that everybody could kind of listen to what they wanted to, and that there was a new medium to share it in, which is really quite interesting when you think about it. And later on, as things develop, it becomes the cassette tape, and the cassette tape lasted a long time. The cassette tape was managed and mass produced, but I mean, you have to think that back when cassette tapes were around, which was, I mean, not that long ago, but long enough, there were definite problems with it. I mean, record labels themselves would worry about piracy, because piracy was almost so readily available. Up until now, you couldn't really copy a record or copy what you'd hear on the radio or anything like that. It was virtually impossible. But now with cassette tapes and the ability to record cassette tapes yourself, now these inventions that had been invented 20 years in the past, 30 years, 50 years in the past, like microphones, now cassette recorders, they were available in homes by 70s and 80s. Now people have these things available to them. People have microphones at home. People have recorders at home. And now they're starting to take cassette tapes and record what they're listening to on the radio. The invention of the mixtape. Everybody's heard of a mixtape, and that's kind of what it started. People bought albums from artists, and maybe you didn't like all of the Beach Boys album. You only liked 3 songs by the Beach Boys. Well, you would take a second cassette, a blank one, you'd put it in and you'd play whatever song it was that you liked, and you'd record that, and then maybe you'd record Cyndi Lauper after, or Prince, or whatever. But then that album became a compilation of your own. You now had a cassette that had the songs that you liked the best. And I mean, that's really what it all comes down to. I mean, us as people, when we listen to music, we're individualistic in our attempt to do everything that we do with music, right? We like certain artists, we like artists to feel like that's strictly ours. We found them, we like them, and we want to put songs and albums and all that stuff together on our own and make compilations of the stuff that we like to listen to, and maybe share it with others, maybe just for yourself. Maybe you want to make a mixtape of stuff to work out to. But this is really where all this stuff started, right? With cassette tapes. And, the cassette tape lasted a long time. But the problem with cassette tapes is that when you get into cassette tapes, they're unreliable. I mean, it requires a mechanism of going from one end of a reel, spinning through where it would play on your player, and then going to another side, which they would have a side A and a side B. The problem with that is, sometimes that ribbon can get twisted, and that would cause a problem, so you'd have to kind of go back through it, find it, and straighten it out physically yourself. People would use pencils to get in there, or they'd pull the ribbon out and fix it, and then kind of cautiously reel it back in. The mechanism itself could break. You could get that ribbon stuck in the mechanism somewhere. The wheel that turns the ribbon could break, and then now your tape won't play. So I mean, it had a lot of downfall, but a lot of ingenuity, and that ingenuity would continue to just go forward and forward and forward. And after the magnetic era, when all that was kind of done and people were trying to find better ways of doing things, you started walking into the digital era. Now, the digital era is what we're in right now, and it started in about 1975. It's one of the more longer eras. I don't even know that after a digital era that we'll have another era of music. I mean, you can sit there and think, but up until the day where they put the music in your head and your consciousness makes music of its own, I can't see where it would go from here. But it's nice to dream and think and be inventive of how to distribute music to people. But anyways, continuing on. So the digital era was started, I would say, right about the time when Philips and Sony made the compact disc. Now, for some of you, I don't know who may not know how an original compact disc works because they're so used to Blu-rays and those kind of things. But a compact disc was limited. It didn't have that as much room as a Blu-ray does now, or discs do by today's standards. But I mean, it allowed for a company to record an album on a medium that now you could play 1,000,000 times over, and that sound quality would never degrade, providing that the disc itself wasn't scratched or wrecked or gouged. But I mean, in a perfect world, if you put the CD in the CD player and just played it and it never moved from there, the sound quality would never ever degrade, which was really what they were looking for from a change from the cassettes. Because when you had a cassette, you play that tape over and over and over and it wears. Ribbon wears. Whereas when you're when you're recording music with a laser, now that data that's being transferred from the disc to your speakers and to you, there's no degradation happening there. That laser that's playing it isn't going to wreck the integrity of the disc itself. Now, CDs lasted a while, and they were pretty much commonplace. Like when CDs came out, you could still, for a while, buy CDs or a compact disc not CDs, a compact disc version or a cassette version. And for a long time it stayed like that. And it was only really up until the digital media era started that cassettes kind of now tapered off and they stopped making them as much and then not at all now. And the digital era is when, you can kind of pinpoint it to a couple points, but I mean, the biggest thrust forward to digital media was when the iPods came out, which would have been in about 2001 or so. And now music was digital, not even a physical copy. You could buy songs through iTunes, and now you'd have a copy of a song. And from there, you could buy single tracks of an album and not have to buy the whole album. And that's really where we're at now. An artist like The Weeknd drops an album, and you can sit there and either sample the album, you can go on Spotify and listen to maybe the whole album, and then decide yourself, well, I want to keep tracks 1, 7, 8, and 12. Those are my favorite songs. And then the rest of them you don't bother with, and then you've only bought those 4 songs. The problem with it is as this medium kind of develops from CDs to now a digital media, the ability to pirate that stuff has become so much bigger. Back when you had to put a cassette in a cassette player and then throw a blank cassette on the other side and record and stop and rewind and record and stop and skip a little bit so you didn't have one song overlap in the other song. Now you had the ability to really pass one song quickly from one place to another, and you could burn it on a CD, you could put it on your MP3 player, whatever that would be, an iPod, or I'm sure there were others that existed at the time. And then from there, now it made piracy such a big thing. Napster comes out, and then I never really used Napster. I don't even think I owned a computer that worked that well when Napster was out. I was still discovering how dial-up works and how Netscape Navigator performed, and I was like, oh wow, I can go look at I don't even know what I looked at on the internet. The earliest thing I remember playing on the internet was Neopets. And, I mean, that was forever ago. But the point is that these things would eventually sculpt the way that music is distributed and formed. And, artists became really almost offended because they take the time to record these songs and do a performance for their audience, and they're paid for that performance. And now that was being stolen from them. Somebody was taking a song, maybe they bought it themselves, maybe they even pirated it themselves, but now they were giving that to somebody else, right? And that's a big problem. And I mean, there's two very strong sides to either way. It's like there's some people who just believe that, hey, you know what? I'm going to download all the music I want because I don't feel like paying a big corporation for the music I want to listen to. And then there's other people that believe that, if you like an artist, if you like their songs, then you need to support that. You need to pay for your songs, and then in that way you're supporting that artist. Because, I mean, not all money's made from concerts and live performances and stuff. I mean, it is true that they get a percentage of what comes from selling music. But, I mean, I don't want to get into the direct correlation between album sales and live stuff and how piracy, because that's not really what it's about. What it's about is that in this time, we've gone so quickly from, I mean, in the span of, 50 years, we've gone from recording something on such a obscure medium and the sound of it sounding so rustic and hard, to now we record at a way that's, it's all digitalized. It's layers over layers, the composition. I mean, for me, that's why I feel that artists rarely can replicate live what they do on albums, because it's just, there's so many layers and there's so much production involved with making albums now. It's very hard to it's very hard to develop that and somehow make it so that other people can... I'm just kind of rambling. I kind of lost track of what I was saying here. There's just so many layers that it's hard to replicate live. It's really hard. But anyways, that was my brief kind of introduction to what the history of the recording medium is like. A brief introduction into my podcast. I'm sure it'll get better with time. I mean, I just got to get used to recording in front of a microphone and get used to getting to know you guys out there and what you guys want from me and what I want from you and what I want out of this. But I mean, I think it's going to be a good journey together. I think we're going to get along just fine. And I mean, if I had 10 followers or 1 million followers, I'm really, at the end of the day, doing this because I love music that much. Music is so important to my life. I'm sure it's important to everybody else's life. And, I want to just share my knowledge. Maybe some knowledge I don't know. Maybe some of it I'll just have to learn as I go. But, I want to share that with you guys in a way that I think might be interesting and involving, and something that you all might like and enjoy and continue to listen to week after week. And I don't know, I guess we'll really see where it goes from here. I really hope that you enjoyed this first kind of taster of an episode. It's not really, my episodes are going to be more closer to an hour when I start recording episode 1. But I mean, this is just to kind of introduce myself to you guys and give you guys a quick follow through on what I'm going to do and what I'm about and stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick little introduction, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to, how we make music nowadays. If you guys want to get in touch with me, ask me any questions, or point out any mistakes I may have made in my ramblings, You can reach me at evergrowpodcast@hotmail.com. I also have a page on Facebook. You can leave messages there, and I'll answer them as I'm able to. Other than that, I guess I'll see you guys next week, and we can do this all over again. My first episode next week is going to be about the Beatles, so I kind of might have to slip it into 2 parts because, well, I mean, I don't know if you know who the Beatles are, but if you know who the Beatles are, they are huge, and there's just so much to talk about with them. They're so diverse, and even from being a band to when they break up, it's just a lot of stuff, and so I want to make sure I do justice and cover as much as I can. Well, thank you again for listening, and I hope that you guys enjoyed what I'm making, and I hope to hear back from you guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week.